Yeah.
So did you have to go through the interview process again, or did they just choose from the remaining candidates?
Hey, Teresa?
Had to go again.
Teresa, are you going
It's
to,
that the second time.
over here?
Yeah, I mean, I'll shut
Are
up.
you going to call this, you going to drive the boat here on this meeting?
Right? Look at us.
All right, welcome to our joint workshop with planning commissioners and city council members. We should probably start the meeting with a roll call. Kathy, do you want to start with a roll call?
Sure, I'll do council's roll. Councilmember Redmond.
Here.
Councilmember Stackplet.
Here.
Councilmember Stearns.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Clure. Here. Mayor Collings.
Here.
Okay, and I'm not sure who we have online. I think we have, do we have Tucson online? Tucson has left. Okay, he may be coming back. All right, Planning Commissioner, let's start with Chairman Melanie. Are you here? Planning Commissioner Belinda Higuera. Okay, sounds like Melanie's here.
Yes, I'm here. Can
Awesome.
you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, perfect.
Planning Commissioner Belinda. Okay, Commissioner Paul Beck.
President,
Yes. Can you hear me?
is there a delay? Is that what we're hearing?
It truly is like a seance now.
I thought you were joking, but
Commissioner
Over the spiritual voice.
Vaughn, last name
Do some hockey talk with you.
Boyinger,
Whenever.
Von Boyinger. And Commissioner David McDowell. Okay, so it looks like we've got 4 here.
Is that enough for us to have our meeting and have a quorum?
Vaughn and Melanie. Okay, moving on. So we have a special meeting.
Waiting to come in?
Sorry?
Laptop. Go get it. And Belinda? No, they're. Oh, that.
Okay, so we have a joint special meeting tonight to present the draft recommendations for walk, bike, ride, and get feedback. And I wanted to, just in case you did not get the email today, we did get a public comment on this from Michael Williams. Did everybody see the public comment from Michael Williams today? Okay. And so moving on, the format of the workshop is hopefully going to be me doing a short introduction to talk about the kind of the purpose and the importance of the walk, bike, ride effort. After which point, I'm hoping that we'll be joined online by Jeffrey Knowles from Alta Planning to do the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and start with my introduction. So I wanted to provide some context to the preliminary recommendations with hopes that the context will help to make more sense of what the goals are and why they're important for the community and the community vision. I see 2 sides to the importance of the proposed improvements. First, to facilitate a healthier community, and secondly, to increase safety while doing that. The vision of the Sustainable Transportation Plan is to decrease greenhouse gases and increase public health by encouraging people to walk, bike, and use transit more, not just recreationally, but for everyday activities like going to work and school and running errands. Reducing vehicle use in town will reduce pollution from vehicles, and increase in exercise will increase public health. In addition to the potential to increase health for our community, these improvements will provide an amenity for visitors who come to be active here. I'm going to talk for a couple minutes about the pedestrian safety crisis. Pedestrian deaths have steadily increased in the United States by 50% since around 2010. At the same time, all other vehicle-related deaths put together have increased by only 5%. There was a steady decrease in deaths in the previous decade having to do with pedestrians. So it's important to understand what's happening that's causing this crisis and who it is affecting in order to understand what needs to be done to minimize accidents while also encouraging more of the community and visitors to choose walking, biking, and transit. Most of my information on pedestrian safety demographics comes from Angie Schmidt, who's a nationally known pedestrian safety consultant and wrote the book Right of Way, which describes the pedestrian safety crisis in detail and what we need to do to make things better. Some brief history on how we got here. The big shift came when the concept of jaywalking was introduced in the early 1920s. Around 1910 and 1920, motor vehicles started appearing on the streets. They were owned by the rich only at that time. Before then, the streets were used much more by people as a gathering place. Public markets happened in the streets and children played in the streets. When motor vehicles started appearing, pedestrians, especially children, started getting run over and dying at an increased rate from being in the street. People began organizing on both sides of the issue. Mothers on one side organized to try and increase safety, and auto clubs and manufacturers organized on the other side to promote the right of vehicles to be in the streets. The idea of jaywalking started as propaganda from the motor clubs. The idea was that pedestrians did not belong in the streets unless in a crosswalk, and even then, only at certain times. Prior to this, if a motor vehicle struck a child and killed them, the driver was considered a murderer. After jaywalking was adopted by federal legislation in the 1930s, it was perceived that a death was the fault of the pedestrian rather than the driver. As of 2019, more than 6,000 pedestrians are killed in the U.S. every year. This is nearly a 50% increase since 2010. Demographically, there are clear distinctions regarding who's more likely to be killed as a pedestrian. Poor people, older people, and people in segregated Black and Native American communities are at a much higher risk. And additionally, more deaths occur at night than in the daytime. Older adults in the age groups of 50 to 64 and 75 and over are significantly more likely to be killed as pedestrians. In Mount Shasta, where the median age is within this age group, this can mean that there is a higher risk here. As the population as a whole ages, that risk is expected to increase more. Currently nationwide, 1 in 4 individuals are 64 years and older. This is growing to where it will soon be 1 in 3. Additionally, trends in manufacturing and sales of vehicles are contributing to pedestrian deaths. Starting in around 2013, the purchase of pickup trucks and SUVs has steadily increased, while the purchase of smaller vehicles has steadily decreased. Trucks and SUVs are designed higher off the ground with larger grills. This contributes as visibility in front and behind of the vehicle decreases with the size, and the size and shape of the front of the vehicles is taller, meaning that if a pedestrian is struck, with a lower front end, the pedestrian is more likely to go over the car, and with a higher front end, the pedestrian is more likely to go under. As you review the proposed improvements, which include better and more connected sidewalks, more and safer bikeways, more visible crossings, keep in mind the intent is to improve safety and visibility and to accommodate a shift from a car-centric roadway to one where the safety of pedestrians and bicycles are safe and prioritized. With that in mind, I'm going to either start the presentation or hopefully we've got Jeff to start the presentation. We have no Jeff. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and start the presentation. So I'm Teresa Spade, and I am the city planner. And the city hired Alta Planning and Design to do our sustainable transportation plan, which is also known as Walk, Bike, Ride Mount Shasta. Jeff Knowles is the project manager, and Katie Sellen is the project planner for Alta. Justy Hansen of Sora is also working locally, doing a lot of the public outreach for the project. So I'm going to talk about the project history a little bit. And next slide. The project started around the winter of 2021, and at that time, it was kind of an information gathering and outreach effort. Around spring of there was a community workshop in 2021, looks like, and like spring, summerish. And then there was a second workshop more recently, probably, I think it was just this past month. We had some online stuff, and just before that, we had another public workshop. So with the public input and the information that was gathered, some preliminary recommendations came about. So there is going to be another workshop opportunity, and the final recommendations are going to be presented summer 2023-ish, it looks like. So there are a number of slides that essentially talk about what the public engagement process has been like. There's been a significant amount of in-person engagement that happened between June and August 2021. And was anyone here part of that public engagement? Did you guys remember being a part of that at all? Or maybe seeing some of the stuff that was left on the sidewalks to sort of guide people towards that. There was the first community workshop that was held last year in the summer. And there were a number of, if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide, and then the one after. There we go, one more. And so there was a number of focus groups and interviews that occurred. There was a community bike ride, and 10 people participated in that. There was a business leaders lunch, and parent and caregivers interview, and there was an older adults interview. There was a mobile outreach at the farmers market, Berryvale, a raised food place, and concerts in the park. And essentially that consisted of a booth with somebody there to provide information and get feedback. And then there, as far as that information, Alta made a map showing basically the hot spots of destinations in terms of where people are most likely interested in going in Mount Shasta. And as you can see, central Mount Shasta is the main hot spot there, but there are a couple other areas that are in and around the schools and public locations that are also important locations that are destination locations. And the next slide. So there was a number of surveys, and the survey, there was like 409 responses to the survey that was put out. And Alta found that the demographics of the respondents generally reflect the Mount Shasta community, so they were really happy with the results of the surveys. And in what it mostly came down to was that respondents do want to walk and bike more than they currently do and drive less frequently. And so most respondents indicated that they wanted to see better options for walking and biking along the roadways. They wanted to see improved safety for all modes and transportation options that support a sustainable city. So those were the top 3 priorities that came from the respondents of the surveys. If we go to the next one. All right, and so this is a question that was in the survey that essentially said that if you were given, I think it was $100 to put towards improvements, where would you put your money? And it shows that trails and biking on paved roads, roadway maintenance are kind of the big items that people were the most interested in terms of spending dollars on improvements. So then we'll go to the next slide. And so active trip potential. Now, this slide essentially shows about how far it's reasonable for people to walk and about how far it's reasonable for people to bike in terms of a destination and distances within the city of Mount Shasta. So it shows that it's a very highly walkable city in that there's a very large portion of the city that is within a walkable distance to the downtown area. And then it also shows that essentially the rest of the city is a very bikeable distance. And then we'll go to the next slide. And part of the analysis that Alta has done includes a safety analysis. And this slide shows the collisions that were bicycle involved between 2014 and 2019. And this information is important because it shows where there are areas that it may be important to improve safety for bicycles. There were 10 bicycle-involved collisions during that time period. And the top 2 collision factors were improper vehicle turning and vehicles not adhering to traffic signals and signs.
Teresa, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hey,
Jeff. How's it going?
Good. I've been watching the live feed and enjoying it, so I can take over now if you'd like me to.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are on the safety analysis slide, figure 15.
Yeah, thanks so much.
All right.
Apologies, y'all. I was enjoying that live feed, but didn't have the Zoom to get in. So again, I'm Jeff Knowles. I'm excited to be here tonight. Thanks, Teresa, so much for getting us kicked off with this.
Sure.
I'm just going to follow along and take you forward. So you can go to the next slide, please. Great. One thing that we also did in terms of the analysis was looking at all the streets and adding in vehicle collisions. So it wasn't just bicycle pedestrian collisions, but all vehicles as well, to see those hotspot locations. And in this slide here, what I want to just draw attention to is the areas where you see the dark purple. Those are the areas where we have the most exposure for all types of collisions. And I've kind of highlighted a couple areas here with arrows where we want to have some particular focus for improvements that would affect all different modes. Next slide. We also looked at level of traffic stress. This is the level of comfort people have currently bicycling or walking on streets in Mount Shasta. And so here, what we've done is we've just assigned each road a score. 1 is a score that means that Any kid, any senior would feel comfortable out there bicycling on that street. And a 4 means that only the most, adventuresome bicyclist would feel comfortable out there. These are more like your high-speed streets, people that would have no hesitation bicycling on the shoulder on I-5. Those are level 4 streets. And then you got in between, so level 2 and 3. So this maps out those locations. This is important for us to think about what streets are important to improve the comfort, because the only way that we can get more people deciding to walk or bicycle is making it more comfortable to do so. So this is a model that we created of your community to really look at where those changes or new bike facilities should be planned in order to increase that comfort. Next slide. We also did that for pedestrian level of traffic stress. Again, pointing out some areas where people would face high stress walking today, areas that don't have sidewalks, or areas where maybe there's gaps in the sidewalk network, or they're close to high-speed streets. Next slide. We also did a really robust inventory of sidewalk conditions and pedestrian conditions, really in the core of your downtown area. So we had a team going out and doing field inventories, collecting photographs, and also adding points into a GIS layers for your computer system. So you have an inventory now, a database of different conditions. Next slide. Those included the locations of sidewalks, the width of sidewalks. We mapped those all out here to show where you have existing sidewalks and where there were gaps. Next slide. And then we also identified different obstructions to the sidewalk. So these were areas where there were uplifts, where maybe roots were creating a barrier, or there were gaps in the sidewalk or major cracks, things that would be difficult for people with a wheelchair or stroller or a walker. They might get snagged up on these locations. So we've mapped that out all through the downtown. We also have categorized all of the sidewalks and the crosswalk markings. See here on the top, you've got an image of a high visibility or a ladder crosswalk that's yellow. Yellow means it's in a school zone. And then at the bottom, you've got an example of just a transverse or just a 2 lines, essentially a standard crosswalk there. So know that now those are all mapped. And that all of that information that we gathered from the analysis that we ran and the field work that we did helped inform initial recommendation ideas. I'd say that these are initial because we're still revising them. Part of this was creating a vision statement that we did in consultation with a technical advisory committee, and that's also been shared out with the public, and we're getting feedback on that. The vision statement is that surrounded by immense natural beauty and recreational amenities, the city of Mount Shasta provides sustainable transportation options that make it easy to live a healthy lifestyle. Residents and visitors of all ages and incomes and ability levels can easily get from their home to their destination by walking, biking, or rolling on a comfortable and connected active transportation network of sidewalks, bikeways, and trails. To help support that vision or realize that vision, there are a couple of different goals that really inform different recommendations that the city could come up with. And the first one is connected. So the city has a connected and convenient transportation infrastructure, particularly for people walking, rolling, and biking. Safe and comfortable. Active modes of transportation are safer and more comfortable for people of all ages, abilities, income levels, and backgrounds to get where they need to go. Sustainable. Mount Shasta's transportation network is as resilient as possible to extreme weather, including fire, heavy snow, and flooding. Economically viable. In addition to meeting the needs of year-round residents, the transportation network serves tourists and local businesses. Fun. On-street active transportation facilities seamlessly connect to Lake Siskiyou, City Park, Shasta Park, the Gateway Trail Network, and other outdoor recreation destinations. In addition, education and encouragement campaigns create fun activities to grow the city's bicycling and walking culture. Innovative. Mount Shasta's transportation system embraces design best practices and new technology, such as e-bikes, electric vehicles, and downtown shuttles. And last but not least, of course, usable. The city's transportation network is well maintained. Next slide. We have quite a bit of infrastructure changes, some ideas about what to do in the roadway or to create new trails or trailheads, but we also have some program ideas. These are things that we can do to encourage more people to walk or educate them about walking and bicycling. Some ideas would be safe routes to school campaigns, creating new wayfinding, so new signage around town to help people get to different locations by walking or bicycling. promotion for local employers and visitors, and a downtown shuttle or park and walk opportunities to help encourage more of that. So the first set of projects I want to talk about are the pedestrian or walking recommendations. Go ahead, next slide. So before we get into that, I'm going to give you a little 101 about different pedestrian infrastructure. Next. First are sidewalks. There are a couple different ways that you could do sidewalks. They could be crushed stone in terms of a path. They could be asphalt. They can be made of concrete, which is an example here with a curb and gutter. There's a lot of different ways that we can match the context to Mount Shasta. These can either be connected or attached to the curb line, which you see in an image here, or it can be set aside with a little planted buffer between the edge of the street and the sidewalk. What we've done is we've identified all the different areas where there could be sidewalk improvements, particularly in commercial areas. We don't have a sidewalk recommendation for every gap in the network on local streets. That is something that needs to be addressed probably by policy, that when properties change hands is the right time to fix sidewalks or fill in gaps there. But it's just too costly for the city, and we don't think that the return on that investment is necessary at this point for neighborhood level sidewalk infill. So these are the recommendations for the sidewalk gaps. Next slide. We also have spot improvements, which are really how do we make it easier for people to cross the street. So if the sidewalk was about how do people travel along streets, this is what we do at those intersections or crossing locations. Some of the ideas could be curb extensions, which essentially is called a bump out at the corners. This slows vehicles from making sharp turns really quickly. It adds visibility for pedestrians, so there's greater motorist vehicle yielding rates, and also shortens the crossing distance, so people aren't out in the middle of the street as much. This is an example where you can add planting to create some green stormwater infrastructure as well, and beautification. Curb ramps, of course, to meet ADA. This is an example here where you've got that tactical warning surface, those bumps on the edge of it there. So there's new curb ramp locations we've identified. Next slide. Opportunities for marking more crosswalks, adding advanced yield or stop lines. This is again to tell the motorist, the driver, where they should yield in advance of a crosswalk, so there's greater visibility. Looking at opportunities for additional beacons to make it easier and safer for people to cross where there isn't a signal. So this could take the form of a rapid flashing beacon, which you see on the left here. It's only activated when a pedestrian comes up and pushes the button, or a pedestrian hybrid beacon, which you see on the right. This is essentially kind of like a signal, but again, it only is activated when somebody pushes the button. Next slide. Other ideas could be pedestrian refuge islands, so making a wider street easier to cross by having an island in the middle where people can get to and then cross the other side of the street. A leading pedestrian interval, just for those signalized locations, it essentially gives the pedestrian a head start in the intersection while the red light is held for drivers, and establishes themselves in the crosswalk so that there's greater visibility. Roundabouts is something that we heard from the public, and we've identified locations where there could be potential improvements for these roundabouts to replace a four-way or all-way stop, or replace signals, or just help clarify areas where there's a lot of confusion. So these maps here have them all of the different spot improvements identified by number, and then there's a table that goes along with it to explain which is in there. On the website at walkbikeridemountshasta.com, you can go in and scale and zoom in using your mouse, hover over them, click on them, and you can also get the information that way. It's a lot easier to get that information and then comment on it. And I'll give you a quick tutorial in a minute here about what that could look like. Next slide. So in terms of biking infrastructure, I'll walk through the different options we have for putting new bikeways on the streets and in the side areas. So go ahead. The first is a shared use path, or Caltrans calls it a Class 1 facility. These are your trails. They're completely separated from traffic. They're used for people walking or bicycling, and there's minimal interaction with vehicles. So these are the most comfortable, but also can be extremely expensive. And if you don't have the right of way, can be difficult to purchase or acquire public right of way for these. But we have some ideas, some suggestions for where these could be studied. Bike lanes You have examples of these in town. On Mount Shasta Boulevard is a good example. Striped bike lane, one-way for one-way bike travel on a street. Again, the only thing that's separating people bicycling and motor vehicle traffic is a painted line. Next slide. You can enhance those bike lanes by creating a buffer. So this is an example on the top left where you just have additional space between the bicycle lane and the car lane. It adds a little bit of more comfort for bicyclists so they're not right next to traffic. Bike routes are class 3s. This is really your low volume, low speed streets. Think about your local streets, your residential streets, where a bicyclist may feel comfortable mixing with traffic since there aren't that many cars or they're moving at slower speeds. These could be enhanced by bike boulevards where we add like traffic calming, so speed humps or chicanes or mini roundabouts. And then the last thing is relatively new. It's a separated bikeway. It's called a class 4. And there's a couple example images here that I've highlighted. And these are like trails in the sense that they are physically separated from motor vehicle traffic, but they're for the exclusive use of bicyclists. And they can be two-way or one-way. And they can be separated by parked cars and curb stops, which you see in the top left here. They can be separated by planted buffers, which you can see in the top right here, trees or shrubs or just grass. And the bottom left is an example where, again, you have marked cars and those curb stops. And then on the bottom right, you can see it's at the same sidewalk level. There's a sidewalk, and then there's this class 4 facility, and it's just curb separated. It's a more expensive example, but one that we've seen as well. So there's a lot of different styles for these things. What we've done is mark them up on the street or on the maps, showing you where these are located. Next slide. We also have some trail studies that we think should be identified. These are reflective of the Mount Shasta Park and Recreation District's Parks and Trails Master Plan that's going on right now. So we borrowed heavily from that and want to endorse the work that they're doing. But I think there's two opportunities that really have a lot of momentum that we could build off of. The one is the Headwaters to Lake Trail, and the other one is the Great Shasta Rail Trail. Next slide. So the Headwaters to Lake Trail is here in green, connecting all the way from City Park and the headwaters of Sacramento all the way down to Lake Siskiyou here, using a combination of city-owned and private right-of-way that the city would need to acquire. But this is a kind of a main north-south spine that would parallel Mount Shasta Boulevard and create a lot of new connections for the community, especially getting out to Lake Siskiyou. The other one is the Great Shasta Rail Trail study, and this would tie into an existing rail trail that is further to the east. There's a portion in town that has been abandoned. It would still need to go through a study to figure out ownership issues, the cost of acquiring the right-of-way, and working through those design details. But it's got some promise as well to connect to this larger regional system. I wanted to point out two what we call crosstown connectors that are currently identified as class 4 separated bikeways. There's one that's running north-south along Mount Shasta Boulevard, and then one works a little bit east to west on Lassen, Pine, Alma, and Rockfellow, which would connect to the majority of the schools in town, along with Shasta Park, and overcome a major barrier getting across I-5, along with major employers like the hospital. So the last thing to point out from the recommendations, there are quite a few, but the other one is the Midtown Trail or Midtown Greenway. And this would be I mentioned those class 3 bike routes. This would be very similar to that, creating a connection that runs parallel to Mount Shasta Boulevard on the east side, running up through and around Sisson Meadows to connect up to the middle school and all the way down really to the new development south of town. So our next steps, next slide. We've got this virtual open house that's open through the end of the month. We had a public workshop where we got feedback, and right now people can go to walkbikerideMountShasta.com and go to the virtual open house and interact with all these recommendations, and they can leave comments about ones that they like, about ones that they don't like, or leave comments about things that they would like to see changed. And so we're going to take all this information, next slide. We're going to take all this information Then we will make revisions to these recommendations, prioritize them, and then put them into a draft plan that we'll bring back to the public this summer. We'll be back in June to share the results of the prioritization process and get feedback on that draft plan. And then we'll make that revision and bring it back to council this fall. So we should be wrapped up pretty much by the end of 2022. Hopeful city council adoption at that time. Next slide. And with that, I'd love to get feedback or answer any questions that you have.
Harry, I read Michael Williams' comments this afternoon, and I very much agree with his comments that I think were dated April 18. I did spend a couple years on the Active Transportation Committee. In fact, I guess I was chair of that for a couple years before getting back on City Council. I also strongly support the Midtown bike route idea that you have on page 26. Don't know if you are aware or not, but the Active Transportation Committee did submit a proposed sidewalk maintenance plan to the City Council. That got referred to staff. I haven't seen or heard of it since then. But if we're talking about sidewalks and sidewalk safety, I think it's important to have a maintenance plan. So I would hope that that would be part of the process or part of the package. I had a hard time seeing the bottom graphs on page 23. So hopefully at some future time we can have enlargements of that. It would be easier to understand. And in terms of roundabouts, I would hope that one would consider possibility of roundabouts on Everett Memorial Highway, perhaps at Shasta Avenue, because cars come down there very fast, especially when we have more traffic in the summer. Second, on Upper McLeod, perhaps around Adams or Washington. And then third, I would hope that we could consider roundabouts at Alma and Mount Shasta Boulevard at that intersection. And then I guess my last comment would be one-way streets on downtown Mount Shasta Boulevard and Chestnut Street. You've probably heard that before.
That's great comments. Thank you, Councilmember Stearns. So yes, we have, and I can give you an update there that we are studying that. So it's not yet baked enough to go into these recommendations, but kind of on our parallel track is that we're going to do some additional data collection, some counts, and we've got our subconsultant LSC that's going to be out there conducting that, and there will be a memo that we will be producing to give this body information about the feasibility of one-way streets and the trade-offs that would be required.
Thank you. Tucson, is it too early to, is it too early to ask questions like the separated bikeway path that's going down Mount Shasta Boulevard, how that would possibly fit, or should we just wait till we get those more detailed presentations from you all?
Everything that we've identified here is feasible. It's technically feasible. So I can talk to you a little bit about how that would work with Mount Shasta Boulevard. Right now, you've got very, very wide travel lanes. They're about 13 and a half feet wide, so wider than most highway travel lanes. So we can narrow those down and get those to maybe 11 feet. And from that additional width, we could also create the separated bike lanes. What you need for that is 5 feet for the bike lanes and 3 feet for that buffer that I mentioned. So we could still preserve parking on both sides of the streets and fit in separated bikeways on Mount Shasta Boulevard for the majority of the street. There is a section where your current bike lanes stop around Sisson Street and then all the way down to McLeod, where there aren't any bike lanes there. That would need to remove on-street parking to fit those in. So that's a conversation, whether it's separated bikeways, buffered, regular bikeways. They don't exist now. And most of the businesses there do have off-street parking. So that's a conversation. It doesn't need to be figured out in this master plan. The master plan is really just, it's long-term vision. It's helping you, the city, apply for grant funding. When you go to design the project itself and deliver it, then you would go and have conversations with business owners and the public about the feasibility of removing parking or reallocating it. But that's the only location where there'd need to be like larger sections for parking to be removed.
Is that roughly the same time that we would get some idea of price tags associated with these?
No, you'll get price tags in the draft plan.
In the draft plan? And you said there's a appendix that has all the detail for all the numbers that are on the maps, what each one of these things are. Is that online?
It's also online. The same information is there. If you go to walkbikeridemountshasta.com and the interactive tool, it's all there.
Yeah, it wasn't, as far as I can see, it wasn't in this. Maybe I missed it, but I just want to make sure that I can find them. Thanks.
Yes, so you were mentioning 5 feet and 3 feet. I tried to stop you and get you to clarify because I'm having a hard time hearing the monitor clearly. Do you understand what I'm talking about? Could you repeat what that was regarding? I know the 3 feet or 3.5 feet was regarding the bike lane, but what was the 5-foot dimension being discussed?
5 feet is your bicycle lane.
Okay, then what was the 3.5 feet? Because you mentioned
3 feet is the buffer that you need for that.
Okay.
To be considered a separated bikeway or a class 4 bikeway, you need a 3-foot separation or buffer space.
Okay.
And in that buffer, you put bollards, or what we've talked with the city is that for snow removal purposes, your snow plows, they really need a kind of a hard edge to push up against. And so we're thinking like curb stops would make sense, and it could be a low cost, down in place curb stops that would be that buffer.
All right, thank you. That's all I have. You guys pretty much asked everything I was curious about, so.
Yes, I believe Teresa Spade was reading off some surveys. I was wondering how many people actually were surveyed?
I think
that's a good question. We've got...
Wasn't it 450?
Yeah, let me pull this here. We had 409 people take the community survey, and we've had additional people beyond that engage with us through the open houses that we've held.
Thank you. Question. Tucson, you got anything?
Sure. You mentioned about a greenway or bike path briefly. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on that. Was that through existing city property or roads? And what kind of feasibility that would look like?
It's the north-south alignment. It's really something that I'd say has come through the work that the Parks District is coming up with here. It would be required, a good majority of it's going to require easements or purchasing property from private landowners or getting agreements with them. And so that's what the purpose of the study, I think, would do, is to figure out what the cost would be and finding those willing landowners to really test to make sure that this is a feasible idea. So we think that right now it has good promise, but we're not ready to say it's a recommendation in the plan. It needs to go through kind of a formal study process.
Yeah, thank you.
If there are other thoughts, I would love to get some comments. I mean, this is certainly, we want to make sure that the recommendations fit the context, fit the character of Mount Shasta. So if this idea of this separated bikeway, if you can't imagine what that would look like on Mount Shasta Boulevard, I'd love to hear, other options if people have them, and just get feedback. I mean, this is really what we're here to do, is put these out there and see which ones hit the mark and which ones miss the mark, and then go back and readjust.
Kathy, did Melanie have a chance to ask her question?
It looks like she's muted.
I'm unmuted at this time.
We can hear you now.
Can you hear me? Oh,
Yes.
lovely. Hi, thank you. I'm thrilled with this draft plan. I do have two questions, please. One, regarding the trails you're looking at, had you thought about the gateway system? I know that we're talking about connecting at the south end of town, and obviously the north end's already established, outside the city limits. So can you address that, please?
Yes, we've been in conversation with the Parks District, with the Forest Service about their gateway system phase 2. And what we decided that this plan here would focus on trails used primarily for transportation and getting to trailheads, and then leave the actual planning of recreational trails to those other bodies that are doing that work. And so we did want to make sure that we had good connections to all the important trailheads in town and kind of on your periphery. And so hopefully we did that. And if we missed any of those connections, so that people don't feel like they need to drive to get there, but can walk or bicycle all the way to those trailheads and then continue on.
Oh, okay, great. And then second, I didn't see anything specific to one of the intersections that I find unnerving. Is at the south end of Chestnut, where McLeod and Mount Shasta Boulevard come together. And I wondered if you talk about that intersection specifically.
Say it again, Chestnut, McLeod.
Yeah, the south end of Chestnut Street, where it hits Mount Shasta Boulevard.
Sportsman's Den.
Yeah. This area, we've got a couple different ideas for what this could look like. It was probably the number one intersection we heard about, and certainly going and experiencing it, we know that there's a lot of confusion there. So it could be the location of a roundabout that would have to be slightly modified for space, but we think it could fit in there as well. If it didn't come through with a spot icon, maybe I just need to clarify that, and we can go back and look at that. But that's definitely an area that needs quite a bit of additional traffic analysis to come up with a solution there. But it's an area that we've identified certainly needing improvement.
Okay, great, thanks. That's it for me.
Two things. Number one, Active Transportation Committee did do a community survey with a lot of responses about 2 years ago. We did submit the survey results to the city. Do you have that? Because that may be helpful to incorporate into your final product.
We have the, Councilmember Stearns, we have the questions that were asked. We've not been able to identify the responses.
Really? Okay. I believe I still have that on my computer, or we can certainly get that to you.
Yeah, I'd love to see those and feed that into the recommendations, essentially making sure that we didn't miss anything at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And then in terms of the bike routes, Melanie Finling asked about Gateway Trail. One of the things that we had talked about, and you may have it in your maps here, I just couldn't clearly discern it, is a bike trail going through the residential area to the west of Mount Shasta, South Mount Shasta Boulevard, that would all go all the way down to the landing, and be able to connect to the south entrance of the Gateway Trail across the street. Is that part of the plan now? Or do you?
Yes. Say the name of the development again, the landing?
Well, what we call the landing, the city-owned Old Roseburg property. The plan is to have the Gateway Trail come down on the east side of Mount Shasta Boulevard through Forest Service property down to the east 50 acres of the landing or the Roseburg property. And on the west side of Mount Shasta Boulevard, have a bike path that goes through the quiet residential neighborhood to the west of Mount Shasta Boulevard out to the west 60 acres of what we now call the landing, so that it would be possible to go down that path both out towards Siskiyou, towards Lake Siskiyou, but also across the street over to the trailhead of the Gateway Trail. And since we are looking at contemplating developing substantial housing on the east side of that landing, that 50 acres on the east side, where the Gateway Trail trailhead would be, it would be ideal to make sure that we incorporate that bike path on the west side as a way of getting downtown. Did I make myself clear?
I believe so. I've shared now my screen, and this is if you go to walkbikeridemountsshasta.com, it'll get you through to the map function here. And all I've done is I've turned on the satellite. And so these are all the recommendations for bicycling. You see in orange here, this is that trail, that proposed main paved greenway trail, or what I've called the headwaters to the lake kind of trail. Is this alignment mentioning, is this what you're discussing here?
I'm having a hard time visualizing it.
It's down there.
This is at the lake. This is going past the Mount Shasta Resort and up Grant Road.
That's the 89 intersection.
Yeah. And this would be an alignment kind of widening the railroad alignment that goes of the abutments underneath I-5. And then this would be into, I believe this is the city's owned former lumber site, right, that's being redeveloped.
So right in here, this is Mount Shasta Boulevard here. And
You just moved
okay, this is the shopping center, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay, so let's go down.
Okay.
This residential area here.
You're right.
That's the landing.
Isn't it right here?
That's the landing.
So maybe that is this line right here. Maybe that is that line right here.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that the assumption was that line is where there is a recommended roadway, and so the trail alignment would need to be a little bit closer to the railroad tracks there.
So I guess this is probably it right here then.
Yeah.
It comes down to the landing and then keeps on going so you can get out to the lake.
So it actually comes down through the orchard property there.
Okay. To be continued. I think that may be what I was talking about.
Okay, great. Good. Glad we could clarify in real time.
Kathy, we have anybody online for questions?
Actually, let me ask one more question, if I may. Jerry, we also have city maps showing, these are at least 3 or 4 years old, but showing the sidewalks in Mount Shasta and the sidewalk gaps. I don't know if you have those or not. But one of the things that the Active Transportation Committee had recommended was filling in the sidewalk gaps, one of them being on Chestnut Street between Mount Shasta Super and the Indian Restaurant. And if you don't have those maps, we can make them available to you.
Let's go to that right now. So let me make sure we got it. Okay. Can you give me that location again?
Well, the maps cover most of Mount Shasta, but the sidewalk gap on Chestnut that the Active Transportation Committee specifically made recommendations on was between Mount Shasta Super on Chestnut Street down to the Indian Restaurant to the north. There's a on the west side of the Chestnut Street.
Yes, I believe that we have that. It's not showing up right now. These are just the spot improvements that I mentioned before. You can see that we've got the existing sidewalk network here, and I'm pretty sure that that is included as a recommendation for the sidewalk network.
That would be good. Thank you.
Yeah, we have that information, just to confirm, we do have that information, but we also used more up-to-date aerial imagery to create a new data layer for the city that goes beyond just the city itself. So we've got two sources to draw from for filling in those sidewalk gaps. But as I mentioned, I think we're going to adopt the policy recommendations that the former Active Transportation Commission put together, which was to fill in neighborhood gaps more at a citywide policy level, and then on commercial streets or streets that create good connections across town, those are the ones where we think there will be investment for filling in the bike lane. So I would imagine Chestnut from Ivy, or the Super. I think there's a gap here on the south side of Chestnut, all the way up to pretty much Mount Shasta Boulevard. Hinckley would be a good kind of termination for that.
Johanna, unmute yourself.
Hi there. Good evening. This is Johanna. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I think this is really exciting that we're doing all of this. And I did send in a letter, but I just wanted to make sure some of the highlights of what I was talking about was that we have minimal impacts on our views, lights, noise, and other, street obstruction, so that we don't lose the overall feel of our town. And I love the idea of roundabouts, by the way. And we also need to consider future projects. The other thing that I thought was really important was the snow berms in the winter, because we have, the snowplow issues, because there was a lot of, in that initial draft, there was a lot of, raised sidewalks and curb extensions and things that might be issues for our snowplow operators and for the residents who, clean up the snow. One of the things that I saw up in Seattle area that I thought was very effective was to go from the sidewalk to a bike lane and then have the parked cars between the bike lane and the traffic lane, so that it gives you an extra buffer without losing that extra 3 feet of space that you mentioned in the 5 feet and the 3 feet. So you're basically going sidewalk, 5 feet of bike lane, parked cars, and then the traffic lane. And so I really think that is a really cool alternative, and it's space saving. And then the other thing I'd like for everyone to consider is there's a lot of inexpensive material used to pave like Pine Street and some of the other roads. And since it was paved a few years ago, it's been very, very noisy. And in order to make being outdoors, walking, biking, a pleasant experience, there's a seal that can be put on top of this asphalt, on top of this, I forget what it's called, the chip seal, and that you could put on top of it to quiet it down. Because one of the things that's unique to Mount Shasta is the snow, and we have snow tires and a lot of noise. And so by using the least expensive material many years ago, it created more noise. But I'm hoping that maybe this could get incorporated into this project with the grants and all of that. And anyway, so I think, let me just see really quick. Yeah, and then the major downtown areas, which I think you've got covered, are the Lassen Bridge and Lake Street, because those are the connectors kind of between the east and the west for Mount Shasta. And definitely, of course, pathways to schools. And I would say only add paint to the roads and then do those ballards, because those are removable for the snow plows. And I'd be in favor of either a one-way or even entirely closing down the one block section from Lake to the Ace Hardware. I think that's Maple Street there by Yaks, but if that happened, we would have to add additional parking further down. But that could be added with diagonal parking, because right now we have horizontal parking and that takes up a lot of space. And I think we have the width to do the diagonal parking. Anyway, so that's pretty much it. I'm really excited. I would just say, please keep any lights kind of down and not create issues for the snow plows. But thank you very much for doing this, and thank you for listening.
Talk on this agenda item here? Mark? Yeah.
I spoke about this earlier, one of your sessions. It's maybe a nuts and bolts issue, but the conversation was about safety. And to get people to feel safe walking and riding their bikes, the speed of traffic is a consideration or concern. And there's, particularly in the north and south old highway, so to speak, going through town, Mount Shasta Boulevard, Everett Highway, as Tim alluded to, Washington, near and dear to me because that's where I live, people drive too fast. And there's cheap, or reasonably cheap, digital speed limit signs that have a display that turns red if you're going over the speed limit. Solar powered, and as I understand it, there could possibly be grant money available to buy them. But anyhow, that's my 2 cents. I want to say it again, public record, because people drive too fast all over town. Yep. That's it.
Anybody else? Going twice. Let's bring it back. Any further council's questions from either the commission or the council? Teresa, you want to wrap up?
Sure.
Or Jeff?
Jeff, did you have any ending comments? Jeffrey, are you there? I think he's still having a hard time hearing. All right.
He's not hearing you for some reason.
Okay. So we've made some notes of your comments tonight, and I will make a summary of those comments. I'll review the meeting and make a nice summary, provide it to Alta, and make sure that that is incorporated in our commentary and hopefully incorporated into the project that will be the, I guess, the more final draft that's brought before you later.
Well, thank you, Jeff, from Alta, and everybody who made it here online or in person. Kathy, anything else other than
Adjourn.
we are adjourned?
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Good. Yeah. Okay. I just got back. I'm on the airplane. I'm like,